RANGATIRA is the story of a man called Paratene Te Manu, whose life spanned the 19th century. So he was born in the very early part of the 19th century and died just before the turn of the 20th century. And in the novel, he's an old man looking back at his life, and particularly at a trip to England he took in the 1860s with a group of Maori elders. And they went to England, they met Queen Victoria, they were the toast of the town in London, thousands of people came out to see them. But at the same time, it was a very difficult trip in many ways, and lots of bad things happened. So that's really what the book's about. RANGATIRA could be translated in a number of ways, but it could mean chief or leader or a person of authority, of power, a person you respect. And a lot of what the novel is about, I suppose, is a meditation on what it means to be a figure of authority. Because I think for someone like Paratene Te Manu, the main character, you know, he was an important person who saw himself in many ways as his life went on becoming almost like a museum exhibit. And then when they were in England, when they had this big English trip in 1863 into 1864, they arrived as people who were worthy of meeting the Queen and meeting the Prince of Wales and going to rich people's houses. But they ended up, I think, feeling a bit like, almost like freaks, where people would just come to stare at them. I mean, I think it must have been, in many instances, quite humiliating. So there's a lot in the book that's about what it means to be a person of authority when the world around you has changed completely and doesn't necessarily see you as that anymore. I'm very interested in the experience of someone who is born at a particular time and place, and by the end of his life, everything has changed around him. So he was born into a New Zealand that was predominantly a Maori country, maybe 98% Maori people, hardly anyone else there at all, a few missionaries, a few traders, a few whalers. And then by the end of his life, at the end of the 19th century, New Zealand was a predominantly English-speaking country with, you know, mainly British immigrants firmly in control, to the point that he was almost a foreigner in his own country by the end of his life. I could say, well, I'll tell you a little story. I had two grandmothers, obviously, and one was Maori and one was English. And my English grandmother came to stay with us for a year when I was 5. And after Sunday lunch, a big Sunday lunch, my English grandmother would sit on a hardback chair, you know, very upright. She didn't sit on armchairs, she sat on a hardback chair. And my Maori grandmother sat down on the ground and dozed off and went to sleep, and which we always found very entertaining, that we had these two very different grandmothers. But then I think, well, these two ways of seeing the world and being in the world are in us. And so I feel like I have those two sides in my own character. The more chance we get to hear other people's stories, the better, I think, because otherwise we can just get very bound up in the familiar and the expected. And it's always interesting to hear things about places you don't really know about, or cultures you don't really know about, places you haven't been. You know, so I like watching, I don't know, Danish crime dramas on television. You know, so we can vicariously experience another society. And it's very dangerous in Denmark, I understand, from watching TV. So the more we can do that, just the more interesting our lives are.